I used to think there were sounds you could only hear once, and then never again. The first word from your kid, the pop of a champagne cork on the night your life finally turns a corner. Turns out there are sounds that never stop echoing either. A jelly-thin swish on an ultrasound screen. A doctor's voice, kind and certain. A number that can end a marriage. Measuring 19 weeks and 3 days, he said. Congratulations, you're halfway. The room had a fake beach painting and a machine that hummed like an air conditioner. That's all I remember aside from the number. My wife, squeezed my hand so hard my knuckles clicked. She turned her face to the screen and smiled. I did the math. 19 weeks and 3 days put conception right in the dead center of the Tennessee wildfire deployment I'd taken in May. A 6-week stretch of ash and blackout tents and satellite phones that barely worked. I had worn the same boots until the leather curled. I had slept next to men who'd coughed up soot like old engines. I had not slept next to my wife. Is that good? Alyssa asked the doctor, eyes shining. It's great, he said. Everything looks perfect so far. He kept talking. Something about the crown rump length and a healthy heartbeat. He pointed at the screen, at grainy white shapes I couldn't bring into focus. I nodded on cue. The gel on Alyssa's belly smelled like bubblegum and disinfectant. I kept my face still and my eyes patient. The doctor left us with a printout. The door clicked shut, and that tiny sound felt louder than the wildfire planes I used to load. Alyssa turned to me, voice suddenly small. 19 weeks, she whispered. Halfway, babe. Can you believe it? I can, I said, and I could. I could believe every bit of it, because numbers don't lie. People do. On the way down the hallway, I stopped at the nurse's station and asked, politely, smiling, the simple, dumb husband questions. Could we get copies of the measurements? Did they have an online portal? I made jokes about being the guy who keeps everything in a folder like an amateur archivist. Of course, the nurse said. We'll upload your images and the report within an hour. Alyssa looped her arm through mine in the elevator, her head on my shoulder. We should tell our moms tonight. Do you want to do dinner at your mom's, then FaceTime mine? Sure, I said. She didn't notice that I didn't look at her, and that told me something too. Alyssa and I had been married 8 years. We met at a 4th of July cookout behind my buddy's apartment complex, the kind where everybody brings a bag of chips and a cheap six-pack and pretends they meant to. She had a smile that made strangers tell her secrets. She worked her way from the front desk to marketing at a small rehab hospital and wore her badge like an invitation to be useful. I hauled freight and then moved into warehouse safety for a national chain. We were not fancy. We were steady. We had a golden retriever named Duke who shed on everything, and a mortgage that felt like a dare. Before the wildfire deployment, we tried for almost a year. There were ovulation apps and multivitamins, and morning coffee switched to tea because caffeine is the devil if you read the wrong blogs. There was quiet disappointment once a month that eventually settled into something heavier, like a wet jacket you couldn't shrug out of. Then, out of the blue in late June, Alyssa sat across from me at our kitchen island with her hands around a mug she wasn't drinking from and said, I'm late. I remember kissing her and lifting her and spinning, the way movies tell you to. I remember Duke barking because he thought dizzy people are invitations to chaos. I remember telling her it was our turn, finally. I remember wanting to deserve it more than I have ever wanted anything. I also remember the first time I noticed her phone going face down every time. The way girls' night went from once a month to once a week. The way she started letting me sleep in on Saturdays instead of crawling back into bed and filling me with laughter and cold feet like she used to do. The way she stopped asking about my day in the warehouse. and I stopped offering. But those memories were shy then. They hid. The ultrasound report did not hide. We told our moms that night. My mother cried so hard she had to sit on the arm of the couch and wave her hand at the ceiling fan like she could pull the tears back into her head. Alyssa's mom, Sheila, screamed and then sent a photo of her pantry already half stocked with baby formula because Costco had a sale and you can always return if it's the wrong kind. Alyssa glowed. I smiled. I took out the trash, and the sound of the can rolling down the driveway made my heart thump in my throat like a scared rabbit. I am not proud of what I did next, but I am honest about it. I pulled the deployment calendar from an old email thread and circled the dates. May 2nd to June 14th. I pulled up the ultrasound report on the clinic portal and looked at the gestational age and the EDD, estimated due date. I Googled the margin of error on ultrasounds, then read actual studies, not just forums where strangers shout into the void. Second trimester dating is pretty accurate when the measurements are clear. 19 weeks and 3 days was not 9 weeks and 2 days, which is what she'd told me she was when we took the first at-home test. 19 weeks and 3 days lined up closer to early April. We had a work conference in early April out in Denver. Alyssa didn't go. She had a girls' weekend. I stopped myself. I made a rule. No conclusions without proof. No screaming. No accusations I'd have to take back. Only numbers and then conversation and then decisions. That night, in bed, she trailed her fingers over my chest and asked me if I would paint the nursery gray or green. Green, I said, and watched her fall asleep. I memorized the curve of her shoulder, the way her hair fell across her cheek, how she murmured my name when the dog scratched at the door. I cataloged everything that had been mine. In the morning, she left early for an off-site meeting, and I scrolled through our cell plan's detailed usage log like a guy pulling a thread he can't see the end of. One number showed up again and again around midnight. A number I didn't recognize. It was always outgoing from her phone as soon as she stepped into the patio and the motion light flicked on. For a while, I did nothing. Then I called it from a co-worker's desk at lunch, because shame makes you clever. Occupational therapy, this is Colin, a voice said. I hung up. I stared at my sandwich until my boss asked if I was doing intermittent fasting again, which made me laugh too hard. Colin worked at her hospital then. He was in a group photo on the hospital's Facebook page. He stood at the edge with his arms crossed and a smile he had practiced in gym mirrors. He had a half-sleeve tattoo and a watch big enough to throw off his posture. A normal man, a guy who could be anybody's best friend until he wasn't. When I got home that night, I put my phone on the counter and started chopping onions for tacos. Alyssa came in, kissed my neck, opened the fridge, and took out a lime. I stood very still. "Who's Colin?" I asked, like it was a thing I had overheard at some point and remembered in passing. She didn't even pause. "OT at work. He helps on the marketing promos sometimes because he's good on camera." "Why?" "I saw him in that volunteer day picture you posted. Didn't recognize him." She nodded and made a joke about how every guy at her hospital with a tattoo tried to angle their arm so the camera could see it. And maybe that should have been enough, except my phone buzzed on the counter with a text from my buddy Ben. "You okay?" The message came with a screenshot he'd taken from the patio camera I'd installed when raccoons turned our trash cans into a buffet. The camera had caught Alyssa at 12:18 a.m. the night before, whispering into her phone, saying a name I knew now. Colin. The caption from the camera's motion detection was almost comic. "Person detected." Proof comes in layers, numbers, images, patterns that add up to a picture you don't want to own. On Friday, I told Alyssa I had a warehouse safety audit early and that I'd be gone before she woke. I did wake early, but not for the warehouse. I drove to a lab on the edge of town where they do early paternity testing with maternal blood and paternal saliva, non-invasive and expensive. I'd read about it at 2 in the morning when the house felt like a stranger's. It wasn't about custody yet, or lawyers. It was about clearing the fog. I left with a kit in a Ziploc bag and instructions that made my stomach hurt. We'll need the mother's blood draw around 10 weeks. You can provide your sample any time. We were already far beyond 10 weeks, according to the ultrasound report. The lab tech was kind but blunt. You'll need her cooperation. I drove home and tucked the kit in my nightstand like contraband. That evening, Alyssa suggested we visit the new barbecue place for ribs and live music. I said yes. I laughed in the right places. I watched her sing along to a song we used to butcher in our kitchen, and I loved her so much in that moment. I thought I might throw up. I lasted exactly 3 more days. I didn't do anything cinematic. No hidden cameras are planted in vents. No private investigator in a black Tahoe. I came home early on a Tuesday because a truck delivery had been delayed and there was no point in staring at empty docks. The house smelled like citrus cleaner, and her perfume, the one that made OMs at church hug her a second longer. There were 2 wine glasses in the sink, one with a lip print that wasn't red because she had switched to tinted chapstick when her mom said lipstick was for grandmas. There was a sweatshirt with the rehab hospital's logo draped over the back of a chair. It wasn't mine. The sleeves were short on me. They would have fit on a guy who spent lunch with dumbbells. I walked to the bedroom and pulled my nightstand open and put the paternity kit on the quilt. Then I sat at the kitchen island until she walked through the door at 6:07 p.m., cheeks flushed, hair up and messy, so beautiful I could have forgiven a lie about anything but a baby. "What's that?" she asked, eyes flicking to the kit on the bed behind me. "It's a test," I said. "Non-invasive. We can do it now, or not at all. If it's mine, I'll never mention this again. If it isn't, we'll figure out what comes next without pretending." Color drained from her face, the way it did the one time we hydroplaned on I-40 and spun a half turn while she screamed my name. She took a step back and then forward, as if her body couldn't decide between fight and flight. "Do you not trust me?" she said. My laugh was a cut I wish I could take back. "I trust math," I said. 19 weeks and 3 days last Thursday. Do you want me to lay out the calendar? She stared at me with a new expression, one I had never seen up close. It wasn't guilt, not exactly. It was calculation. How much do you know and how much can I still control? "There's a margin of error," she said too fast. "You know that, right? It's not exact. Plus, with my cycle, don't," I said. "Please don't insult both of us." She sat down on the edge of the bed. The kit between us looked obscene. She picked it up like it might hurt her and then set it back down. She stared at her hands for a long minute, then looked up at me with tears that had been waiting just behind her eyes for weeks. I wanted to move to her. My body leaned before my brain said no. "I messed up," she whispered. "Once, when you were gone. I thought you weren't coming back, and I was scared and lonely and stupid. And then I found out I was pregnant, and it was like God hit pause on the worst thing I've ever done. I wanted it to be yours so badly, Ryan. I prayed. I bargained. I told myself we'd make the math work. Please don't do this. Please don't make this a court thing. We can move past it. People do. We're having a baby." Her words came like rain, so many that you can't figure out which drop is making you wet. She reached for me and I stepped back. She saw it. Something in her went hard. "It was Colin, wasn't it?" I said. And something in her mouth changed shape. "It doesn't matter who," she snapped. "It matters that I'm your wife, and this is our life, and you're going to burn it down because you want to be right about a number." The baby kicked then. I saw it. It was the weirdest thing, visible like a tiny wave under her skin. Love hit me so hard, I had to grip the dresser. I loved a child I couldn't claim and maybe never would. I loved the woman in front of me and hated her like fire hates water. "Take the test," I said. And I didn't recognize my own voice. She refused. She refused for weeks. She accused me of control, of cruelty, of being one of those men who wants to own everything and forgive nothing. She stopped answering my texts when I was on shift. She started sleeping with the TV on and the volume low. She began an affair with martyrdom and brought it to bed every night. I went to a lawyer. If you've never had a lawyer explain the word presumption using your name, you should keep it that way. In my state, if you're married when a child is born, the husband is presumed to be the father. The hospital will ask you to sign. If you sign, you're the legal father. If you don't, things get messy. If you don't challenge paternity within a certain window, it almost doesn't matter what blood says. The lawyer, a woman with soft eyes and iron in her voice, told me two things that lodged in my spine and made a home there. Document everything, and don't sign anything you can't live with for 18 years. "I'm not saying it isn't yours," she said. "I am saying that if you have doubt and she won't test, you have to protect yourself until you know. Protect yourself." The phrase tasted like metal. Men don't use it often without feeling like they're betraying some manual written long before them by men who were more certain about everything. I moved into the guest room. I told Alyssa I'd pay the mortgage and keep the lights on and be present for appointments. I also told her that if she blindsided me at the hospital with papers, I would decline. And I told her why. I did not tell her that I had installed a second camera in the carport, because I didn't trust myself not to spend my life staring at it. I deleted the app after a week when it showed me nothing but raccoons. The weeks between an ultrasound and a due date have a way of turning a person into liquid. I was shapeless. I showed up and lifted pallets and strapped loads until my hands felt like they were carved from rope. I ran after work until my lungs sounded like harmonicas. I made lists, crib screws, car seat installation, pediatrician interviews that I canceled before I did them. I watched Alyssa move through the house like a moon pulls tides. She was either tender or terrible. She bought tiny onesies with dinosaurs on them and then threw away my toothbrush because the mint makes me sick. As if my breath alone was the reason. She had girls' nights. I stopped asking where she went because I was hoarding my dignity now like a man in a bunker hoards canned beans. Sometimes she came home with a sheen that wasn't sweat from summer. Sometimes she crawled into my guest bed like a childhood memory I couldn't refuse, and cried into my neck until we both slept without touching anywhere else. Love is so many things. One of them is stupid. Near the end, on a gray morning that smelled like wet cardboard, she came into the guest room and sat on the edge of my bed and took my hand and put it on her stomach. "She has the hiccups," she said. There it was, a flutter under my palm, like the world itself was hiccuping. I'd never cried from my sternum before. It felt like something heavy coming up from deep inside me, like I'd swallowed a stone months ago and now my body wanted it out. Alyssa pressed our hands harder and closed her eyes. For a second, we were a couple again. For a second, the whole story could have had a different chapter next. "I'll test after she's born," she said. "I promise." "Yeah, Promises are bridges. Some are strong, some are ropes across a canyon. The hospital was new and smelled like new. Paint and plastic and sterile things unwrapped for the first time. Labor was a long loop of time, hours stretching and shrinking while machines beeped and nurses told jokes about their exes. I held Alyssa's leg and counted and told her she was brave until I believed it. When our daughter came into the room, she sounded offended. I loved her before they wiped her clean. I also kept my eyes on the papers they slid across the rolling tray. "We'll get you to sign these when you've had a minute," the nurse said to me. "No rush." It wasn't a trap. It was routine. I had practiced this moment in my head 100 times. None of the rehearsals felt like this. Alyssa held our daughter and whispered words into her hair so soft, I think even the baby had to lean to hear them. Sheila cried in the hallway, even though the door was closed, and the nurses told her 3 times to sit down. When the nurse rolled the tray toward me, I put my hand over the top page. "I'm not signing today," I said. "We're going to do a paternity test first, like we discussed." Alyssa looked at me like I'd walked into a church and shouted a curse word. Then she put her eyes back on the baby and kissed her forehead. And if I had been a different person, I would have folded. But I wasn't, and I didn't. "It's okay," she told the nurse in a voice I didn't recognize. "He's been anxious." The nurse gave me a look that tried to be neutral and missed by an inch. She tucked the papers away without argument. The doctor, different from the ultrasound doctor, younger and tired, came by and said, "Beautiful baby, and good job, Mama. And we'll send someone from case management to talk about next steps." He did not say 19 weeks and 3 days. He didn't have to. They drew the baby's blood when she was 2 days old. Just a heel stick, a drop that seemed too small to hold a life. They swabbed my cheek. Alyssa refused the maternal sample, and the lab said they could work around it. "It'll take a little longer," the text said, "but we can triangulate with the baby and you." I didn't go home. I went to my mother's and sat at her kitchen table and stared at her bowl of lemons like they were answers. She made me spaghetti the way she used to when I was 8 and had skinned my knee so badly the neighbor called her from the kitchen window to say her boy was broken in the driveway. She put her hand on my head and didn't move it until the food was gone. On the 5th day, the envelope came. I held it the way you hold a baby. Gentle, careful, terrified you'll do it wrong. 0.0% probability of paternity reads like a math problem you wish you'd never learned. It has no adjectives. It doesn't care how your house smells, or what your mother's name is, or how your wife cried in church when they lit the Advent candles. It is colder than any number I have ever seen. I put the paper back in the envelope and drove to the hospital. I took the elevator to the 4th floor and walked the last hallway alone because my mother knows me and stayed in the car. The room was full. Alyssa, her mom, her sister, 3 balloons, a stuffed elephant wearing a knit hat. The baby slept with her mouth open a little, the way babies do when they have spent their energy on existing. "Hey," Alyssa said. "You look tired." "I am," I said. I handed her the envelope. She held it like she could make it less sharp by touching it soft. She opened it. She read. She did not cry. She placed her hand over the baby's blanket and patted it twice, like she was trying to memorize the rhythm of a life before it changed. "She needs a name on that line," she said. "She needs a father." "She has one," I said, and something in me tore. "It isn't me." Alyssa looked up and she smiled. Not a nice smile. Something brittle that cut on its way to her eyes. "You think Colin is going to step up?" she asked. "You think he's going to buy diapers and wake at 3 a.m. and go to parent-teacher conferences? He's not. He doesn't want kids. He wants women who want them. so he can feel big and then leave before he's asked to be. I don't know what he wants, I said. I know what I can't do. I can't sign a paper that says a number is wrong because it hurts to be right. You're walking away, Sheila said from the chair by the window, voice trembling. From a baby. From your wife. From a lie, I said. From 18 years with a fuse burning under my bed. It sounds noble when I write it down. It didn't feel that way. It felt like dying poorly. I left. I didn't slam the door. Rage had made room for something worse by then. Clarity. I walked into full sun, which was offensive, frankly. The world doesn't stop for your heartbreak. The world runs errands and cleans gutters and complains about potholes and wrinkles where your windshield wipers streak. I leaned on the hood of my truck and tried to remember how to breathe without counting. Divorce is paperwork and logistics wrapped around a grief you keep in your glove box because you need your hands free to sign things. My attorney moved like water. We filed to disestablish paternity before anyone could establish it. We filed for divorce on grounds of adultery because I had the numbers and a picture of Colin's sweatshirt and a camera timestamp that would survive a courtroom. We filed like it was war. I slept on my mother's couch as if the cushions knew things about sadness that mattresses don't. Colin texted me once, a paragraph that began with the words, "man to man." I read it twice and then put my phone in the freezer, which is a trick I learned from a guy in my deployment crew who said, sometimes metal is the only thing that can make a thing stop burning you. When I took the phone back out, I deleted the message. I didn't need his version. I had enough of my own. Alyssa's attorney tried for a while. He called. He offered settlement language that smelled like forgiveness and rot. He dangled the baby like a miracle I could buy if I just signed my name in the right place, on the right day, with the right pen. Are you listening? My lawyer asked after a long call on speaker where the other side said the word best interest 6 times. I am, I said. I'm also listening to the sound of a fuse. We had our first hearing on a Wednesday in a courtroom that had seen more beige suits than love stories. The judge wore reading glasses low on her nose and a patience that came from years of watching people lie badly. My attorney laid out the timeline like bricks. She slid the envelope across the bench without drama. Alyssa's attorney talked about trauma and the unreliability of men who count more than they feel. He did not say 19 weeks and 3 days. He also did not say Colin's last name. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't read from a paper. I didn't have to. I love that baby, I said. I loved her from a heartbeat. I will always love the idea of who she could have been with me. But I won't build a life on quicksand. If the court orders child support because the law says it must, I'll pay. If the law says I don't have to, I won't. What I won't do is pretend. Not for her sake, not for mine, and not because a lie is easier to live with than a truth that hurts. The judge looked at me over her glasses for a long time, and then she nodded once, like a person who's heard a song she recognizes. She ruled. She used words I won't write because I don't want to be my own lawyer in my memory. The results mattered. The timing mattered. The presumption died. The marriage ended. The day the divorce decree arrived, Duke dragged one of Alyssa's socks out from under the couch and dropped it at my feet like a prize. I sat on the floor and pressed my face to it and breathed in a life I no longer had. I stayed there until the sun cut a line across the living room rug and Duke laid his head on my shin and sighed like a sad old man. People ask me, by which I mean 2 people have asked me because most people are better at pretending they don't want the gory details, if I miss her. I do. I miss the version of her who slept nose to nose with me when my father died and made me cheese toast at 2 a.m. because grief is a carb-burning sport. I miss her hand on the back of my neck when a game went to overtime. I miss her voice saying the word babe, like it was a private joke and an address and a prayer. I do not miss the woman who folded a lie into my breakfast every day for months and smiled while I ate it. After a while, I stopped keeping track of Colin. He moved to a different city or a different department or a different planet. I didn't care as long as it wasn't my house. Alyssa moved in with her sister for a while. The baby, her baby, grew into a toddler on the edge of my life, like a star you can't see unless you look a little to the side. I know the first word because my mother's friend knows Sheila, who can't stop talking in the floral department at Kroger. I know the birthday party had a dinosaur cake because social media is a thief with a good camera and a bad conscience. I do not know what it feels like to hold her now, and that is a hole that will exist in me for longer than it should. I started therapy because my attorney told me it would look good, and my mother told me it would feel good, and my body told me if I didn't put words to this, it would build a new room inside me and move in. The therapist was a man with kind eyes and a way of making silence feel like a conversation. "You walked out forever," he said in our second session, not as a question. "Yeah," I said. "What does forever look like today?" "It looks like paying attention to my life," I said. "It looks like not opening the freezer unless I actually need ice. It looks like saying yes when Ben asks me to meet him at the batting cages, and no when loneliness tells me to text Alyssa just to ask if she remembers that stall at the state fair where they sold fried Oreos, and we pretended we were 18 again. What does it sound like? The dog snoring. My mother calling to ask if my smoke detectors need new batteries. A warehouse full of men saying dumb things because they don't know how to say the other thing. What does it feel like? Like my chest is a house that somebody moved out of. Like it's quiet in a way that is good and bad, depending on the hour. Like numbers are still the only thing that makes sense, and sometimes that makes me a coward. He nodded, and we sat in that for a while, until the silence felt like a pillow instead of a brick. I don't have a tidy bow. That's not how this works. There's no last scene where Alyssa cries at my door and I hold the baby and forgive everybody, and we decide to be friends who exchange Christmas cards with a glitter that never comes off your fingers. There's just a man who learned that love doesn't fix math, and sometimes the bravest thing you do is nothing. But you do it completely. Every now and then, I'll be in line at the coffee shop, and a toddler will twist out of a stroller and toddle toward the pastry case, with her fingers out like a little zombie. I'll hear a laugh that could be any child's, and remember a room with a fake beach painting, and a machine that hummed, and a doctor who said a number that split my life into before and after. I don't hate him for it. I don't hate anybody anymore. Hate is heavy, and I have carried enough. Last Sunday, I took Duke to the park behind the high school where the track turns your shoelaces red with dust. We walked until his tongue hung out, and he looked back at me like he'd made a mistake, and I was the worst father he could have chosen. We sat on the grass, right where the band sets up in the fall. The wind carried the sound of somebody's backyard grill. Somewhere not far away, a baby cried, and then stopped, soothed by a voice I couldn't hear. I pulled the ultrasound printout from my wallet. I had told myself I'd throw it away after the decree came. I had told myself a lot of things that turned out to be lies I told to make the hours pass. I looked at the grainy white shapes. If you squint, you can see a face. If you don't, you can still see a future. I folded the picture up and put it back. I rubbed Duke's ears, and he groaned with gratitude like an old door. I stood up and brushed grass off my jeans. We went home because that's what you do, even when the word home shifted on you when you weren't looking. If you're reading this because you Googled something at 2 in the morning, period late, ultrasound wrong husband not father, now what? Know this. You will survive the sentence that breaks you. You will walk into a day that feels familiar again. You will learn to love a dog like he hung the moon and figure out how to cook for one without eating cereal over the sink. You will stop counting weeks. You will sit next to a stranger in a waiting room someday and hear them say a number that sounds like an earthquake, and you will breathe through it. You will choose yourself without making it a crime. And if you are very lucky, you will find a way to be kind to the version of you who checked the calendar twice and still wanted to believe. 19 weeks and 3 days. It was a measurement, not a verdict. The verdict was mine. I walked out because I couldn't build a life where truth wasn't the first brick. I keep walking because forever is a road, not a door you slam. There are days when I look back. There are more days when I don't. And when the sun drops just right over the warehouse roof, and the forklifts line up like obedient animals, and the world smells like diesel and summer rain, I catch myself thinking of the doctor's voice and the way he meant well, and the way he didn't know he was ending one life while another began. "Congratulations," he said. He wasn't wrong. Not the way he meant it. Not the way I live it now.